In the elegant and upscale restaurant, the Sterling Grove, nestled in the heart of Manhattan, Rachel had worked tirelessly for years. The Hostess stand, where she held court, was her domain. For nearly a decade, she had prided herself on maintaining the exclusivity of the restaurant, ensuring that only the most refined guests were allowed in. The regulars were affluent, influential, and in her eyes, deserving of the refined atmosphere she had cultivated. That afternoon, the restaurant experienced a brief lull between the lunch and dinner rush. Most of the tables were occupied by businessmen, their ties loosened, women in designer dresses sipping wine as they discussed upcoming vacations. Everything felt under control, predictable, just the way Rachel liked it. Then, the door swung open. Rachel glanced up, instinctively assessing the new arrivals. A well-dressed couple stepped inside. The man wore a sharp, tailored suit, the woman, a flowing silk blouse. They exuded an effortless elegance, but Rachel barely took note. Her mind was already forming an opinion. There was something about them that didn't quite fit. And then she noticed the two children. A boy, maybe 14, awkwardly adjusting his tie as if it were his first time wearing one, and a girl of around 10, holding a small, expensive-looking handbag. Rachel's eyes narrowed. She had seen it before, wealthy black guests wandering in, often accompanied by someone who belonged in the restaurant. But this family? They didn't fit the usual mold. Rachel straightened up, placing her hand firmly on the hostess stand as they paused by the door. The man scanned the room with a confident ease, like they belonged. Rachel forced a tight smile and spoke in her usual crisp tone. "Can I help you?" The man smiled back, polite but confident. "Yes, we'd like a table for 4. Rachel didn't hesitate. "I'm sorry, we're fully booked for the evening." But the man didn't react as expected. He didn't frown or exchange a disappointed look with his wife. Instead, he simply nodded, as though considering her words. "That's strange," he said, glancing around. "There are plenty of empty tables." Rachel's grip on the stand tightened, irritated by his challenge. "We're holding those tables for reservations," she said, her voice firm. It was a lie, but she wasn't about to back down. The family wasn't stupid. The woman glanced around, her lips tight. The children stood quietly, waiting for their father's response. He took a slow breath, measured and calm. "All right," he said, his voice smooth. "We'll wait." Rachel didn't blink. "I'm afraid there won't be any openings tonight." A brief silence passed as the wife exchanged a glance with her husband. The boy looked at his mother, then back at Rachel. The man gave a small nod, as if he had anticipated this response. "In that case," he said, "I'd like to speak with the manager." Rachel's smile faltered. The manager? She knew the type, the ones who thought a manager could solve anything. It wouldn't. "The manager isn't available right now," she said curtly. The wife sighed, shifting her handbag from one arm to the other. The children remained silent. The boy's jaw tightened, the girl looked up at her father, then back at Rachel. The man, however, didn't react with anger or frustration, just patience. Rachel hated it. "I see," he said finally. "Then we'll be leaving." He turned slightly, signaling for his family to follow. Rachel almost relaxed. Almost. But then the wife spoke again, her voice even but laced with something Rachel couldn't quite place. "Are you sure you don't want to call your manager?" she asked, her tone testing. Rachel scoffed, shifting her weight. "I'm sure." The woman smiled, small but knowing. "All right," she said, and with that, the family turned and walked toward the exit. Rachel should have been relieved, but there was an odd tension in the air. The moment the door shut, Paul, the general manager, burst out from the back office. His usual sluggish demeanor was gone. He moved quickly, his eyes darting across the dining room until they locked onto Rachel. "Where are they?" he demanded. Rachel frowned. "Who?" "The family that just walked in." Paul's voice dropped to a near whisper, but there was an edge to it that Rachel had never heard before. Dread. "They left," Rachel said, confused by his sudden panic. Paul's face went pale, and he ran a hand through his thinning hair, muttering under his breath. Then, without another word, He rushed toward the door. Rachel watched as he sprinted outside, scanning the sidewalk. Within seconds, he spotted them. The man was talking to his wife, his hand gently resting on her back. Paul shouted something, and the man stopped, turning to face him. Rachel felt her stomach flip. Paul was apologizing. The wife turned slightly, her expression unreadable, while the son stood rigidly beside her. The youngest, a girl, clung to her father's sleeve, her small fingers gripping the fabric as she glanced up at Paul, then back at the man. Without a word, the man nodded and followed Paul back into the restaurant, the rest of the family trailing behind. As they re-entered, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Conversations quieted, the clinking of silverware softened. A nearby waiter stood a little straighter, sensing that something was off. Rachel swallowed hard, feeling a strange unease crawl up her spine. Paul, normally confident, walked beside the man with an air of extreme caution, his usual gruffness gone. The man, however, remained the same, calm, composed, and unbothered. It wasn't arrogance. It was something far more intimidating. Rachel cleared her throat, trying to force out a laugh. "Paul, what's going on?" she asked, but he ignored her, not even glancing in her direction. Instead, he gestured toward the best table in the restaurant, a private booth by the windows, reserved for VIPs. "Please, Mr. Bennett, right this way," Paul said, his voice low, almost reverent. Rachel froze. Bennett. She had heard the name. Everyone had. Leon Bennett, one of the wealthiest men in the country, a self-made billionaire who owned a variety of luxury businesses. And he owned this very restaurant chain. Rachel's heart pounded. Leon's wife, Camille, slid into the booth with practiced grace. Their son followed, sitting stiffly beside his mother, while the daughter, the one Rachel had barely noticed earlier, climbed into the seat and rested her chin on her hands. Leon sat last, calm and unbothered, the picture of control. Paul wiped the sweat from his brow. "Mr. Bennett, I am so." Leon held up his hand, signaling Paul to stop. Then, he turned his gaze to Rachel. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Leon studied her for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Tell me, Rachel, what exactly made you turn my family away?" Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she say? That she had made a snap judgment, deciding they didn't fit her idea of who belonged here? That her sense of exclusivity had nothing to do with reservations or attire, but something uglier? She couldn't say any of that. The silence hung thick in the air, suffocating her. Finally, Leon leaned back in his seat, his voice cutting through the tension. "We invest in excellence, service, quality, and, most importantly, people. Clearly, we need to rethink who represents our brand," he said, his words landing like a hammer. Rachel's chest tightened. She had spent years controlling who entered this space, deciding who belonged and who didn't. And now, for the first time, she was the one being evaluated. The one who didn't belong. But it didn't end there. Leon wasn't done. "We don't tolerate bias here," he said, his gaze sharp as a knife. "And what you did was bias, Rachel. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision you made the moment we walked in." Rachel felt the weight of his words crushing her. She couldn't breathe. Camille, Leon's wife, spoke up next, her voice measured but sharp. "Is this how you treat all your guests, Rachel?" she asked. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "No. She stammered. But Camille wasn't interested in her excuses. She turned to Paul. "Is this the level of service the Sterling Grove is known for?" Camille's tone was calm but cutting. Paul's face turned red with embarrassment. "Absolutely not, Mrs. Bennett," he muttered, fumbling for words. Leon's gaze remained fixed on Rachel, his expression unwavering. "Rachel, you can take the rest of the day off," he said, his voice final. Rachel's heart sank. It wasn't a firing, not technically, but the message was clear. Her shift was over. As she turned to leave, she could feel every eye in the restaurant on her. No one spoke up in her defense. They knew.